one of the things that I learned early on, or that I understood, was that there were conservative and liberal churches. There were affirming spaces that allowed same-sex relationships within the church and actually officiated marriages of those relationships, and then there were churches like mine that were non-affirming. And so it surprised me when I heard about this organization. At the time it was called the Gay Christian Network, which is now called Q Christian Fellowship. But when I first attended a conference in Chicago back in January of 2014, it was the first place that I had ever heard of that was trying to gather people from different theological beliefs into one space. And it was just like, I didn't know a place like this could possibly exist. And so I found that it was a beautiful space. It was a space that allowed the flourishing of people, even though they had different theological opinions. A place that wanted to value the other person and demonstrate love and be in community. And so that's actually what I presented to my church, as the church was trying to discern whether to become affirming or non-affirming. I actually said, I think it would be good to model ourselves after the Gay Christian Network. That, I don't want people who disagree with me to leave. I don't want people who agree with me to not feel safe here. What would it mean for us to gather as a community where we don't brush aside our differences, but we are able to say time out and worship together and have communion together. And so that's what we ended up voting on, is that the church shifted from being a non-affirming space to what we called it at the time a third way space. Unfortunately, that word third way has been used in a lot of different ways now. And so third way, could be like churches now where they allow membership of LGBTQ people, but oftentimes they'll draw a line and say, but you can't be a pastor or you can't get married. And so in those spaces, one of the things that I talk about in my book is there's a difference between a third way space and an inclusive space. And what I call Q Christian Fellowship is an inclusive space in that there are no groups of people that use their power to exert authority on another person or community. In other words, in a lot of so-called third way spaces, straight people are still trying to dictate to LGBTQ people what they can or cannot do. And I think that's an abuse of power. I think that's where we have to understand that power dynamics and the misuse of power is still taking place. Whenever you have a church community that is telling minorities what they can or cannot do, that becomes really harmful. And no matter how you want to frame it, no matter whether you say we're welcoming, we want you to hear, we love LGBTQ people, as long as you put a line and prevent them from doing anything cis and straight people could do, then there's this inequality, and I think that's harmful. And so one of the things I try to do is I try to help churches understand just some of the power dynamics at play, and try to encourage, to create a space that, people are all on a journey. There are gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans people that are not affirming, and they need a space to try to process and whether they actually ever change or remain in their theological viewpoints. That's not what's most important. What's most important is how do we love one another well and respect people wherever they are in the journey. And at the same time, not create these rules to suppress people's ability to flourish. And so that's what I would say is one of the distinctions between the affirming, inclusive, and third way space.